Happy Monday, boys and girls. It is history time, so I want you to make sure that you have, what I did was I sent home a huge packet for you of reading, and then you also have your worksheet. So this week, we're only going to have this one video, and it's not going to be very long because you've got a couple of pages of questions to do. Remember, as you read through your work, you will discover and be able to reason out the answers for these. Some of them are straight answers out of the book. Some of them you're going to have to think through. Some things I want you to say in your own words. So notice when I say, explain in, number 12, explain in your own words how the pagan world is heartless and merciless. You're going to read in there about it being painless or merciless or heartless. And you have to explain how the pagan world was heartless in your own words. Don't use the words out of the book. I want you to explain it yourself, okay, in your own way. Now, when we're dealing with Jesus, the focal point of history, one thing you're going to notice during this lesson is how they're going to be identifying the pagan view of man versus the Christian view of man. Remember, the pagan view of man is that men are naturally assumed natural inequality, that men are there to serve the state. Whereas the Christian idea says that every man has independent value, that they're valuable because they're created. It doesn't matter what good they do or what evil they do, they're still valuable. Right? And that also that the state was made for man, to protect man, to benefit man. Man was not made for the state. The state and government were made for man to protect man's life, liberty, and property. Okay? So let's make sure that we understand and have those ideas of the differences between the pagan view of man and the Christian view of man, because they're very vital. All right? Now, you're going to notice that there were 3 nations. And you're going to answer questions on this. And we discussed a little bit about this last year, but I want to go into more depth this year. There were the Jews and the Greeks and the Romans. Now, I want you in your paper to read through and identify how they were benefit to the gospel and to the coming of Christ. Every single one of them played a part, okay? So those are the main nations to remember as you study history. Now, also, you're going to read a little bit about the pagan idea of man and the Christian idea of man and what the effects were. Now, notice that one of the effects of the pagan view of man was the cruelty that came across. How men treated men. Remember, I told you about if a baby was born deformed or whatever, they used to just take it and leave it in the mountains or leave it in the wilderness. You know, there's some tribes, even today, and I think it's in Peru, that if they have too many children, they have another children, they'll take that baby out and they'll bury it alive. Right? Can you imagine taking your baby that you just gave birth to and it's crying and little bitty in your hands, and you go dig a hole and put that baby in the hole and cover it up? Or you take that crying baby and you leave it up in the wilderness where animals can eat it, and it starves to death or gets eaten by an animal? Can you imagine they would treat their own children that way? And if they would treat their own children that way, imagine how they would treat a slave or someone who wasn't even of their own family. The heinousness, the terrible things they would do. The pagan view of man creates evil. And we're going to study, I think it's Joseph Stalin this semester. Remember last year we studied Mao Zedong and what he did to his own people? He starved possibly 100 million of his own people. The cruelty that comes from the pagan idea of man is what is one of the worst things about it, right? Can you imagine in the times of Israel that they would take their children in Moloch, and what it was a statue, and you'd fill his belly with fire and his hands would get hot, and they would take their babies and they would throw their babies into these burning hands, and they would cook their babies alive as a sacrifice to Moloch or Asheroth. So whenever you read in the Bible about Moloch and Asheroth, the Asheroths and the Baals, is dealing with human sacrifice, killing their own children. There's a huge distinction nowadays. If we hear about slavery, or if we hear about someone abusing their child, or if we hear about someone even abusing an animal, we're like, how could they? I mean, there's laws in America that if you abuse an animal, you could actually go to jail. Right? Do you think that came from the pagan idea of man? That's a Christian idea of man. Because we care for the things that God puts in our trust, right? Before, you could kill your slave whenever you wanted to, but there's laws against killing people now, correct? It's a Christian idea of man that's working itself out in our society now. And you see, as the pagan idea starts to gain strength and people start returning to that pagan idea, the value of life falls, right? You've got certain countries in Europe with euthanasia. People get old and they're just debilitated and the kids don't want to take care of them anymore. They can give them a shot and kill their parents. It's actually happened in certain countries around the world. Okay? When they're of no use to society, they're put to death, basically. That's a pagan idea of man. The Christian idea of man teaches you honor your father and mother. You care for your mother. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, and that's where you forget things and stuff like that. My mother took care of her for many, many years. Washed her, cleaned her, fed her, combed her hair, gave her baths. My mom showed honor to my grandmother. That's a Christian idea of man. My mom didn't take my grandmother and lead her out into the woods and just push her out there and say, all right, grandma or mom, thanks for the good life you gave me. You're a burden. And let the animals come and eat her and let her die of starvation. It's a pagan idea of man. The cruelty of the ancient world compared to today. Even though cruel things happen today, for today, when something cruel happens, most of us are aghast. Most of us are sickened and angry at it. I can't believe someone would do that to their child. I can't believe someone would treat someone that way. But in the pagan world, in the world before Jesus, oh man, it was normal. No one thought anything about it. The fact that the Ninevites came in and killed as many people and stacked their heads up and threw babies up in the air and caught them on their spears or smashed their heads against the rocks. The fact that they would just kill children. It was normal. People were still sad probably and didn't like it, but it's like, hey, this is the way the world works. Today, that's not normal. And you have to realize that's because the Christian idea of man has permeated society, even in a pagan country, right? Or even in a country that maybe not everybody's a Christian. They still have, even in Europe, they still have some of these ideas of the Christian idea of man. But you look at nations that don't believe in the Bible, and look how cruel they are to their people, right? People come from all over the world to live in America, even with all the things that are going on in America and the difficulties with the racism that still is here with some people. There's racist everywhere you go, right? And racism is only going to be eradicated when people get the Christian idea of man. Because the Christian idea of man says everyone's equal. Doesn't matter what you look like. Doesn't matter what you do. Doesn't matter how you act. Right? You're all equal. We're all valuable. Okay? The pagan idea of man breeds racism, and the Christian idea of man eradicates racism. Even Paul said, there's no Greek, there's no Jew, there's no man, there's no woman. Everyone is equal in the eyes of God. We're all the same. Christianity is the only religion that has raised women up to be equal to men. Every other religion usually pushes them down, makes them subservient to the man. But true Christianity, the man and the woman are equal. Now, yes, the husband has authority in the home, but that doesn't mean the husband is a dictator in his home, commanding his wife what to do. The wife has submitted herself to her husband. Voluntary consent. But they're equal, right? And they're equal, but she's submitted because she voluntarily says she's submitted. She consents to be under his authority. Now, that doesn't mean that the man needs to be like, hey, I'm the husband. You have to do whatever I say because I'm the dad and I'm a man. No way. In a home, mothers and fathers make decisions together. It's a foolish man who makes decisions all on his own without consulting his wife. Because I'm telling you, women are smart, especially moms. Okay? They've got a sixth sense, right? They can pick up on things that sometimes guys can't pick up on. And men need to learn to listen to their wives, but they're created equal. Only Christianity has made women equal. Other religions don't make women equal to men, right? So you have to realize the effect that Jesus had on the world by coming and the change that took place or that started and is still working itself out, right? Even in the United States, it was based on Christian principles. Even when they started with the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, there was still slavery in America. They were still working out these ideas, getting rid of pagan ideas that had been permeating the world for centuries and centuries and millennia. And slavery basically is gotten rid of now. I mean, we do have human trafficking, right? But I don't think there's anybody in the world who approves of human trafficking, except maybe the evil people. But in those days, Back when slavery was here in the United States, most of the world believed in slavery, right? They thought it was okay. But now we're seeing it's getting rid of. And right now we're dealing with this idea. We see these ideas of racism coming up and of how certain people feel about other people. And there's some good things that's coming out of this, and there's some things that's been exposed. But the truth of the matter is, to get rid of racism is Christianity, right? Is this Christian idea of man. It's the pagan idea of man that is causing dissension and causing us to hate, or causing people to hate one another just because of their political beliefs or because of their skin color or whatever. Christianity draws us together. So I want you to be very aware of the differences between the pagan world and after Christ came. Even though there's pagan stuff going on, evil stuff going on, God's ideas of equality and the importance of the individual, the Christian idea of man, that he is valuable, is still being developed in the world, right? It's not completely there yet, but we're developing it. We're developing it first in our hearts and our minds, and then the way we act is going to represent that. You're going to go out, students, and you're going to be those who understand the value of men. You're going to go out and you are going to help change people's minds to understand that each person is valuable, no matter their skin color, no matter how much money they have, no matter what they've done or haven't done, right? Because you understand the Christian idea of man. And you understand that when there's just the pagan view of man, it generates cruelty, intense, terrible, horrible cruelty. And we're going to study some of those people. We're going to study Adolf Hitler this year, Joseph Stalin, Pol Pot. You're going to learn about these angry, evil dictators who had this pagan view of man that thought that man was created for the state, and that gave them license, or that gave them, quote unquote, the right to be able to kill as many people as they wanted because the state is the greatest in their view. It's the pagan view of man. We understand that Jesus came, like true liberty really started. These ideas came, but once people had the Bible in their hands, starting with John Wycliffe, and he translated the Bible through Tyndale, the Geneva Bible, the King James Bible, all these Bibles that God brought to the hands of the people, these ideas were able to expand and go faster and move quickly, even more quickly than it ever had, right? These ideas crossed the oceans with the pilgrims. Let's read something. We're going to read this page. It's a page that says Christianity. It's this one right here. I'm not going to tell you the answers. The greatest, it's right in the middle. The greatest and most dangerous of despotisms is that beneath which the depraved inclination of the human nature, the deadly influence of the world, namely sin, miserably subjects the human conscience. Sin destroys your conscience. The Bible talks about a seared conscience. How is it that someone can go out and kill somebody and kill somebody and kill somebody? Or someone who's human trafficking can take a woman and sell her as a slave, and then take her and sell her as a slave here and sell her as a slave here, and his conscience doesn't even bother him anymore. It's because his conscience has become seared, right? Sin has destroyed his conscience. There are no doubt many countries, especially when those which the sun of Christianity has not yet illuminated, that are without civil liberty and that groan under the arbitrary rule of powerful masters. Notice the light or the sun of Christianity has not come into those nations yet. And because Christianity has not come, how have the people been treated? Because if Christianity is not there, then you have the pagan view of man. So the people are treated in a cruel manner. They're under mean, powerful. Think of Saddam Hussein years ago. I don't know if you guys remember Saddam Hussein, right? Or even North Korea, right? How they treat their people. So evil. But in order to become free outwardly, men must first succeed in being free inwardly. If you are not free inwardly, you will not be free externally. If you're in bondage to sin, right? If you continually disobey your parents because you're in bondage to sin, they're going to put those external restrictions on you to limit the freedom that you have. Remember, I told you the secret. If you never want your parents to bother you again about your chores, do your chores, right? Same thing. But if you're in bondage to sin, you're continually disobeying, guess what? You are going to lose those external freedoms. Your parents will have to put limits on you of what you can do. Okay, you can go, but you have to be back in 1 hour. because you haven't been self-governed. But if you've proven yourself that you're free internally, you're obedient to Christ, you're obedient to the commandments, you obey your mom and dad, they know they can trust you, then your parents will let you do pretty much what you want because they know they can trust you. When I was a senior, my mom and dad used to let me stay out till 11, 12 o'clock at night because they trusted me. And if I was going to be later than 12, guess what? I'd call them and say, hey, mom and dad, on a landline because we didn't have cell phones back there. I'd call them from some of my friend's house, say, hey, I'm going to be leaving my friend's house pretty soon. I'll be home in about 20 minutes. And they'd be, okay, that sounds good. Because they could trust me. Because I wouldn't say, hey, I'm going to be back at 11 o'clock and then not show up till 1 o'clock. If I was going to be late, I would call them and let them know. If I told them I was going to go to a friend's house, I would go to a friend's house. I wouldn't go to some party. Does that make sense? Because I was free internally, I had liberties externally. Boys and girls, students, you've got to learn this. You are determining the amount of restrictions on your life by being governed, self-governed, or not being self-governed. You cannot be free externally until you're free internally. It's how it happens. History has proven that, and we'll see that as we study. In the human heart, there's a vast country to be delivered from slavery. Slavery to what? In our heart, he says, our heart has a lot of land and it needs to be delivered from slavery, the slavery of sin. And only Christ can set us free from sin. Slavery, abysses which man cannot cross alone, heights he cannot climb unaided, fortresses he cannot take, armies he cannot put to flight. He's saying there's things in your heart that you alone can't get rid of. There's difficulties in your life that you cannot overcome by yourself. There's sin in your life you cannot overcome. There's habits in your life that you can't overcome by yourself. There's battles inside your heart that you cannot win and in your mind that you cannot win on your own. In order, listen what he says, in order to conquer in this moral battle, moral, that which is right versus that which is wrong, man must unite with one stronger than himself, with the Son of God. In order to conquer that sin, who do you have to unite with? How do you unite with Jesus? How do you unite with God in order to overcome that sin? Because that sin is what leads us to the pagan idea of man, and our conscience is seared, and we start hating people for the color of their skin, hating people for how they vote, hating people for what they do. Believing that man is worthless, that some are worth more than others. How do we overcome that? Only through uniting ourselves with Christ. Only Jesus can take care of that sin that's inside of us. Let's say that again, or read that again. In order to conquer in this fortress, or in this moral battle, he must unite with one stronger than himself, with the Son of God. The only way that your heart can be set free from sin, right? That you can have internal freedom and liberty is by having Christ in your life. Boys and girls, that's a powerful thing, because that's going to determine how you're going to be governed in the future. Are you going to be governed externally, or are you going to be governed internally? Guess what? God leaves a choice up to us, doesn't he? And he allows us the consequences of our sin, and he allows us the consequences of our actions. Right? We have to consent to the government of God. We have to consent to be obedient to his laws. And he says, choose life and blessing, death or cursing. Right? He said, before you this day is set life and death. I tell William all the time, all right, William, God is giving you life or death, blessing or cursing. Choose which one you want. God's allowed you to decide. Let's read one more quote. Very last page, which is Noah Webster's quote. All right, this one. Advice to the young. Almost all the civil liberties now enjoyed in the world owes its origin to the principles of Christianity. Do you realize that? All the civil liberties, the liberties that we have in our government is because of Christianity. Men began to understand their natural rights as soon as the Reformation from the Popery, that's not potpourri, like the smelly stuff. Popery means the Pope, the Catholic Church, began to dawn in the 16th century, and civil liberty has been gradually advancing and improving as genuine Christianity has prevailed. So notice, it's gradually advancing and improving. We're not there yet. We have not eradicated racism yet, but we're working towards it, even in our own hearts, right? We're working towards it. Christ's work is a slow work, but it takes a step at a time. It's progressing. By the principles of the Christian religion, we are not to understand the decisions of ecclesiastical councils, that means church councils, for these are the opinions of mere men. Nor are we to suppose that religion to be any particular church established by law, meaning it's not that any church is established by law. Like the United States can't pass a law that says everybody has to be part of one family church, right? Or whatever church it is that they want. With numerous dignitaries living in stately palaces, arrayed in gorgeous attire and rioting in luxury and wealth, squeezed from the scanty earnings of the laboring poor. He said, the government is not supposed to set up a church and the people of the church all be happy and wealthy while they're taking all the money from the poor people. Doesn't that sound like the pagan idea of man? Remember back in the pagan idea of man, it said that whose hand it fell heaviest on was the working men, the women, the slaves, and the captives of war. Remember that? It was hardest for the men or the people they thought that were not as important. You see the pagan idea here? He's saying it's not that pagan idea. Nor is it a religion which consists in a round of forms and in pompous rites and ceremonies. No. The religion which has introduced civil liberty is a religion of Christ and his apostles, which enjoins humility and piety. It takes piety, which is reverence and holiness, with humility, being humble, and it puts them together. And benevolence, that means generosity, which acknowledges in every person a brother or a sister and a citizen with what? Equal rights. Look at here, he's contrasting the pagan idea with the Christian idea. He said Christianity is what does what? Acknowledges or recognizes that every person is a brother or a sister and a citizen with equal rights. This is genuine Christianity, and to this we owe our constitutions of government. Our Constitution was based on these ideas that every person is a brother, a sister, and a citizen with equal rights. Now, the moment the Constitution was passed, did everybody in our nation have equal rights? No. But it was slowly but surely being worked out, right? Slowly but surely being worked out. So anyhow, I want you to read through. You got your questions. Where's the page with all your questions? Here you have your questions. So read through these. Read through all of these things and get out and answer your questions. If you have any questions for me, you don't understand something, make sure you call me. Don't call me on Friday morning. I mean, you can, but hopefully you've done all your stuff that you could do before Friday. All right, boys and girls, enjoy your week of history, and we'll see you next week. Bye.